All right, so take a look at this. This is my 2004 Porsche Cayenne that I've owned for about 8 years. And let me tell you, I put a lot of work into this thing and it's been a nightmare. I'd say most of the time, this is where it sits here in my garage with the hood up on ramps, and I am working on it. So I actually did a starter replacement. Well, let me start at the beginning before I talk about the starter. So when I first got this vehicle, I thought it was great. You know, the seats were comfortable. It's really awesome. I love the car. It drives really well. And about 2 months into it, I had a coolant leak. Not just any coolant leak. I had all the coolant in the entire engine empty out of the car, and I had to pull over. Come to find out, there's actually a recall for this. And in the middle of the engine, there's plastic coolant tubes that are known to explode and leak. Little did I know there was a problem. And essentially what you have to do is you'd have to take off this plastic cover, this plastic cover, this plastic cover. You have to take off the whole intake manifold. So everything on the top of the engine, you have to take off this piece here. You have to take off all the beauty covers around the whole thing. And then once you get this off, the intake manifold, underneath the intake manifold, there's plastic pipes, 3 plastic coolant pipes in the middle of the engine. And underneath those plastic coolant pipes is the starter. So in order to get to the starter, you have to tear the whole thing apart. Well, when I first got this car, the coolant pipes burst, and to bring it into the shop was thousands and thousands of dollars. So I thought, all right, I'm going to do it myself. Well, I got a Porsche manual, and come to find out the labor to do the coolant pipes, it calls for 12 hours of labor to do the coolant pipes. So I decided to do it myself. And let me tell you, it took me, I think 15 hours of labor. So essentially what you have to do is you have to tear everything off, get to the coolant pipes. And then once you get there, you have to cut off the coolant pipes with a hacksaw. And then after you remove them, you have to sand down all the connections and then replace it with, you actually have aluminum coolant pipes. And then right at the end, they're connected with like 3 little hoses with hose clamps on them. So I did my coolant pipes. And then a couple years later, after I did my coolant pipes, my starter went out. So the starter is actually underneath the coolant pipes. So I had to do it a second time. Well, the second time I tore the whole thing apart, pulled the coolant pipes off, got to the starter. I got the starter on eBay for like $300, $350. It was just a cheap starter. Replaced that. And it took me maybe about 8 hours to do that. And then just here lately, it's been, well, I guess it's been about a couple years since the starter went out again. And I think what happened is I had a little tiny leak where I didn't tighten the hose clamp down all the way, and it was leaking on my starter because the coolant pipes are right on top of the starter. So if you have any leaks, it leaks on your starter and your starter goes out. So I thought, all right, I'm going to bring it to the dealer and just have them do it. I've already done this. I spent like over 30 hours on this crazy thing. I'm going to have the dealer do it. So I had the dealer do it, and I went down to Prestige Imports in, I think it's Denver, Colorado. It could be Lakewood, Colorado down there. And they did the starter. They called me back and said, well, we did the starter, but the problem is we notice you have a leak on your cooling pipes that's leaking on the starter. And we already did the starter, put it all back together. Just keep an eye on your leak. And I was like, what do you mean keep an eye on the leak? Because the leak is right above the starter. And if you put it all back together with the leak, it's going to leak right on the starter, and the starter is going to go out again. So I was like, all right, tear it all apart and redo it. And I want you to fix the coolant leak, because otherwise the starter is going to go out again. That's the problem I had in the first place. And you can't do a sloppy job. Well, I got back to pick up my car, and they're like, well, since you didn't tighten the hose clamp on the tubes all the way, we're saying it's your fault that it was leaking, and that's why we had to do it a second time. I'm like, what do you mean? That's why I had to do it a second time. You should have seen that when you were in there either replaced the hose or, you know, tightened up the hose clamp or whatever was leaking. Oh. So I got the bill over here. Let me see. The bill was absolutely outrageous. Let's see. What did I do with it? Oh, I put it over here. Oh, you're not going to believe this bill that I got. So the whole thing, look, it's like pages and pages long. It came to $3,456.63 for a starter replacement. What? $3,400 for a starter replacement. I paid $15,000 for this car. And the funny thing about this car is when they were selling them new, they're like $100,000 cars. And when I bought it, you know, it was 10 years old. I paid $15,000. Now that they're like 18 years old, these are selling for like $6,000 for the car. So this is more than half the cost of a used Cayenne in the starter. You won't believe how much they charged me for the starter. The parts, they charged me $1,916 for parts. I don't know where they got. So I think oh my goodness. Let me just show you how much they charged me for this. The starter, $1,547.62 for the starter, just for the starter. What? That's outrageous. And then for the labor was $1,360. What? Tax was $124. I could have done this job myself for about $350 from if I would have done it myself. So yeah, that's painful, man. 3,400. I just can't get over that. So I've decided I am never taking my car ever to a Porsche dealer. No way, never. never. That is outrageous. So the other thing I learned on this car is it has a lot of problems along the way. One of the big things is if you bring it in for an oil change will cost you $200, but most people don't know how to do the oil change. I brought it into Jiffy Lube and I did an oil change. I got it back. It was a nightmare. And I was like leaking oil all over the place. And then underneath, you can kind of see it. I don't know if you can see it underneath, but there's skid plates. There's like 4 of them that you have to remove on the bottom. And the problem is there's like a whole bunch of screws on the skid plate. You have to use blue Loctite on all the bolts, otherwise you lose them. So the first time I did an oil change at one of these, you know, Jiffy Lubes or whatever it was, they didn't put Loctite on the skid plate bolts, so they're all falling off, and I was leaking oil all over the place. And so I brought it back. They did it a second time. Well, it was the same thing. I was leaking oil all over, and I was losing all my bolts from my skid plates. Well, there's actually 2 drain plugs, so you can't even see them unless you take off all the skid plates underneath. There's 2 drain plugs. You have to at least replace the crush washers. I usually change out the crush washers and the drain plugs every time I do. And then just the oil filter is $35. And there's only one kind of oil you can use. Mobile One, I think it's 030 or something like that. So there's like one kind of oil which is really expensive and it takes a lot of oil. Yeah, that's crazy. So why is it up on the block again? Well, it's been sitting here for like a whole year. And well, what actually happened is the fuel pump went out. And there's actually 2 fuel pumps. And the fuel pumps are underneath the back seat. So you have to take out the whole back seat. And then you have to take out there's 2 fuel pumps, a fuel regulator, fuel pressure control unit, and a fuel filter and all that. So what I've actually been doing on this car is I've been buying the parts myself and then going down to a local mechanic, which nobody knows how to work on. Nobody, unless you're a Porsche mechanic, you don't know how to work on a Porsche. There's so many little things. So what I've actually been doing, take a look at this. I've actually been printing out step-by-step instructions on exactly what to do because I just don't have the time. So this is the fuel pump with all the color pictures that I put together for the mechanic. Exactly how to do it. And most of this I got on pelicanparts.com. And you can actually go there and they have instructions, and then some of the stuff that, you know, I did, I kind of had a summary at the beginning. Some of the stuff I replaced, like the fuses and fuel pump relays and all that. So you definitely need instructions for your mechanic. Then you have to go in with a special computer. I go in with a Durametric hooked up to my laptop, so I can clear the codes and figure out what all the codes are. So you know, normally a fuel pump would be like 1,500 to 2,000. I actually did it for 600 with the parts and the labor, doing it that way, which is pretty awesome. So I just spent 600 on 2 fuel pumps, fuel filter, fuel pressure regulator. Put some new tires on it for 1,200. Here it is, back up on the ramps again. Not working, not starting. I'm pretty sure this time it's the crankshaft position sensor, which is underneath by your drain plugs. And then the connection comes up. Apparently you have to take off your air pump here, according to what I've seen on the internet. And then it's just a plug-in right there. But you have to take all the skid plates off. And every time someone takes the skid plates off, they don't put the Loctite on all the screws. But yeah, this thing has been quite the nightmare. I replaced the drive shaft. The drive shaft went out, which is crazy. It's making this weird rumbling noise. Replaced that. I don't even remember all what I replaced on this thing. I did the spark plugs. Pretty much went through the air filters and everything. The cabin air filters. Probably have to do the air filters again at some point. You have 2 big air filters on either side. But it's been a great car, except all the problems. The electrical problems are a nightmare. And these lights, these headlights, there's like so many little lights. You know, the high beam, the turn beam, everything. And it's always like, I'm always chasing the light bulbs going out. I already have like several little light bulbs going out again. I have to replace some of those. Nothing on this car is simple. And then the radio, the stereo, it works when it wants to work. So it'll like pop and sputter, and then it'll work fine for a month, and then it won't work. And then like this, the camshaft, the crankshaft position sensor. There's also 2 camshaft position sensors on the top, but the crankshaft position sensor went out. I get this generic PSM error on the dash. You don't know what it is until you plug it in and look at the Durametric and clear your codes. And then it'll start and run with that error. It'll be a little bit jerky, and then the other day, right in front of my garage, it wouldn't start. And it wouldn't start again and again and again. And I came back an hour later, it wouldn't start. Came back a couple hours later, it wouldn't start. And then at the end of the day, I went out and it started right up. It's weird. This car has weird errors where it'll just, sometimes it'll work, sometimes the radio will work, sometimes it won't. Sometimes it'll start and sometimes it won't. The other thing about this car is the battery drain. Man, you do not want to let it sit for like a month. I don't know if it's the security system or what it is, but it will drain down that battery. It really wants to be driven every single day. So that is kind of crazy. It's a fun car, but it will definitely make you a Porsche mechanic, or you will go broke at the dealer trying to fix this thing. And I think that's why they're selling for $6,000, is because, people see, $4,000 starter repair. They're like, no way am I going to buy that car. Even for $6,000, there's no way. So there you have it. That's my story with the Porsche Cayenne. It's been a nightmare.